Hey, Michael with XForcePC. We're going to talk power supplies, some of the things that we take into account when choosing power supplies. So it's not all about total wattage. Lots of times people say they want a 1,000-watt power supply, 700, 800, whatever, 1,200 watt. Our systems, the highest end system we sell on the highest power draw I can possibly make on it, by just loading it down with processing work and GPU work, the most it draws is a little under 400 watts. So that's why we settled on a 700 watt to 600 to 700 watt, depending on which system you're looking at. That's why we settled on that for a power supply. Because worst case scenario, they're drawing a little less than 400 watts, 380, 390, something like that. So yes, the total number is important, but there's more things that go into that. First of all, there's the cooling aspect. So back in the day, there was a fan in the back of the power supply, and then there were vents on this side. And so the power supply would also serve as your case fan to actually get hot air out of your case. Well, nowadays they do it differently. The fan is on the bottom, and so this is sitting in the bottom of the case, and the air goes in the bottom of the power supply and out the back. It never mixes with the air inside the case. Notice here, this side is totally sealed. This is the side that's inside the case, totally sealed. So the air that goes into this power supply and comes out the back doesn't touch the air inside your case. It's actually totally independent. And mentioning the fan, one thing that's important is to have a variable speed fan. You buy a really cheap power supply, the fan's just going to run at 100% speed all the time, which will cause excessive dust buildup, and it's loud. It sounds like a hairdryer, a muffled hairdryer running inside your computer. It's not good. Another aspect of the power supply is what type of cables and connectors does it have. This is the main motherboard power connection. Notice it's a nice long cable. I've bought cheap power supplies before. I'm willing to admit that this cord is like this long. It doesn't even reach where you need it to go. So that's an important factor, is will the power cords reach? Another important factor has to do with the video cards. The video cards, at least the high-end gaming ones, all require auxiliary power. So they can't get all their power from the slot that they're plugged into on the motherboard. They need power directly from the power supply. So most of the higher end cards have two 6-pin or either a 6 and an 8-pin connector on them. So this is actually enough to do 2 video cards. But what I typically do is, even though there'll only be 1 video card in the system, I'll use both wires, and that way it just kind of distributes the load between the 2 wires. But technically you could just use 1 wire and use both of these connectors and plug them into the video card. Again, these are nice and long too, so you can route them and hide the wires where you need to, or where I can route the wires and hide them where I need to. We have nice long leads here for our SATA, for a hard drive and optical drive. And what this allows me to do is I can just use this 1 wire, plug the hard drive and the optical drive in, and then I can just cable tie off all these other wires, and they're out of the way. I just kind of coil them up in the bottom of the case, and that way, if you do need them in the future, you have them. The last cable to talk about is the one that supplies power directly to the CPU. Nice and long, again, allows me to run it behind the motherboard tray and in the back, and that way it's not, there's not spaghetti inside of your case. And it's an 8-pin. It can split into 2 4-pins. But the good thing about it being an 8-pin is it delivers nice, clean power to the processor. Cheaper motherboards will only have a single 4-pin connector, and so that's why this does split apart into 2. But on the systems we use an 8-pin power connector for the motherboard and for the power supply, so that the processor gets a nice clean delivery of power. The other thing involved too is how much power you have on the 12-volt rail in the system. It's important to have, when you're with a gaming system, to have a good bit of 12-volt power. So on this power supply we have 50 amps total. for 12-volt power, and so that means that we'll be able to power the video card very effectively and efficiently, and we won't run into any type of power delivery issues. One more thing that you could have is a component power supply. So a component power supply, instead of having all these wires here, you actually have the wires actually plug in. And so that way, if you have some wires here you're not using, you just don't hook them up, and it makes for less clutter. But I haven't found that the price premium for a modular power supply really makes it worthwhile. Especially since we use these cables very efficiently, and then there's 3 cables that we don't even use that we just coil up in the bottom of the case, nice and neat, and tie them down so they don't, get in the way of anything and make the case look all cluttered. So, haven't found that spending the extra money really makes sense on that particular upgrade. I think I mentioned earlier our systems draw under 400 watts. When they're at idle, they're actually drawing under 100 watts. So the newer systems today, unlike the systems of yesteryear, are very good at powering down components, lowering voltages whenever the load goes down. So your processor will slow down, your video card will slow down if it's not doing anything. Kind of like changing gears in your car. It changes to a lower gear and doesn't draw as much power. So if you're surfing the internet or checking email, things like that, you're drawing 80, 90, maybe 100 watts, but typically more in the 80 watt range. So that 700 watt power supply isn't having to work too terribly hard. And then again, even under load, less than 400. If you have any questions about this or any other topics, send me an email at michael@xforcepc.com. Again, that is michael@xforcepc.com.